Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books. Today we have a review of one of the most popular fantasy books of all time, The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, book one of the Wheel of Time series. This is a non-spoiler review, so you can watch this video without having read the book, although I think I'm like the last person to have not read it on booktube. If you are looking for my spoiler thoughts, I'll be having a full spoiler podcast style discussion with Matt from Bask in the Story, and that will be coming later this month. Matt and I are reading the entire series together, so if you are interested in our spoiler thoughts, we will be coming at you every single book until either he or I decide to give up, or we finish the series. I don't think we'll be giving up based on how much I enjoyed book one. But you never know. There is a part of this series called The Slog. Now, we're debuting a new review format today with The Eye of the World. What I'm going to be talking to you guys about is several sections. So I'm going to be talking about world and magic system. I'm going to be talking about characters. I'm going to be talking about the story. And then finally, I'm going to give you my pros and cons. And my overall star rating that I've given this book on Goodreads, which you could look up right now by the Goodreads link in the description, but please don't, because that's just mean. So, Eye of the World. I'll give you a very brief overview of the story here before we get going. Now, Rand al'Thor is the main character of Eye of the World, and he is a shepherd's son in a village in the arse end of nowhere. And then a woman comes to town. A woman and her warrior sidekick. She is kind of this very stately, very refined lady. And she takes an interest in Rand and his two best friends, Perrin and Matt. Now, almost as soon as she arrives, an army of monsters invade the town. And Rand, Matt and Perrin are forced on the run with this mysterious woman named Moraine and her sidekick, who is like her bodyguard / super soldier, whose name is Lan. And they eventually find out that she is an Aes Sedai, which is a incredibly powerful witch, wizard, what have you, sorceress. And Lan is her warder, which is kind of like her physical bodyguard, protector, / like footman, butler, assistant. He's kind of everything to her. Now, Rand, Matt and Perrin, and then Rand's love interest, Egwene, and eventually Nynaeve, who is the town's doctor, or kind of like faith healer sort of thing. They all end up having to go on the run from these Trollocs and these kind of minions of the Dark Lord, who's referred to only as the Dark One, because if you say his real name, he can like have influence on you. So they end up going on the run, and they have to basically travel across this kingdom through lots of tiny villages, across this kind of wintry landscape as spring has yet to set in, even though it's kind of March or April time, and because of some dark magic shenanigans. And they meet, loads of interesting characters, go to some interesting places, and the eventual goal is to get to the fortress of town, city of the Aes Sedai, which is called Tar Valon. Now, I'm not going to spoil or discuss any more of the plot in this book. I'm just going to be talking around everything. So like I said, if you haven't read the book, you are absolutely free and easy to continue to watch this video. However, I'll say up front, I did enjoy the book and I do think you should read it. But let's talk a little about the world. Not the eye of it, just the world. And I've got my notes here written down. One of the big things I'm doing in 2024 is trying to make my reviews a little more structured and to have more, I don't want to say like deeper analytical thoughts, but I would just like to I want to be able to provide more of a strong impression of how I feel about the book because my previous reviews have been very much like, what if you and I sat down in the pub and you asked me about what I just read, and then you let me talk for 20 minutes. But what I want to do now is to have a bit more of a structure. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the world. So one of the big things for me was that I felt that the world felt very real. It didn't feel overly fantastical. Like, say, for example, there's no elves or dwarves or whatever. It's not very Tolkien-y in that respect. Although I am to understand that this book is extremely familiar to Lord of the Rings, but I've only seen the movies and not read the books, and I haven't seen those movies for over a decade. So I'm much more... I'm coming to this a bit fresher, I would say, rather than somebody who has a really deep knowledge and understanding of Lord of the Rings. But yeah, so the world felt very real, and it felt kind of... There are some darker parts of the story. So there's a whole section where it feels like the characters are being hunted and they can't trust anyone. There's a lot of discussion of kind of the realities and the horror of fantasy settings. And even though it had that darkness to it, it felt more to me like it was just quite real, not grimdark like you might see from something like Game of Thrones. I also really liked how there was a lot of detail to the world. I felt like Robert Jordan, whether he did or didn't have this, it feels like he had a world-building Bible. So Sanderson talks about when he wrote Way of Kings, he did something that he said he gave himself world builder's disease, which is where he spent way more time than he ever should have building the world, building the lore, building the history for the backstory for these books. And I feel like Robert Jordan has done that. I feel like Jordan has given himself world builder's disease because there's so much in this book and it's very dense with detail. But the thing that I really liked about it was it didn't feel like I was having lore just dumped on me. So I watched the Two to Ramble review of this morning while I was getting ready for the day and whatnot. And it's quite funny because the Austin on that says he felt like a lot of the lore was dropped in lore dumps, but I definitely didn't feel that. So because our characters are, they're from this tiny village in the middle of nowhere, they know bits and bobs, they know stories, but they don't know the reality. They don't know, like, when Rand meets Loyal, he's not like, oh, I know what that is. He has no idea. He thinks Loyal's a Trolloc. So I think that was really interesting. And I really liked how, as I was saying, it didn't feel like I was just being dumped on with lore. It felt like it was natural for those characters to need that explanation when there were kind of big history and backstory bits. For example, when you find out about Lan, that didn't feel like a lore dump. It felt like a very natural storytelling moment. The other thing I really liked about the world, and this could kind of come under characters, but I think it's more appropriate here, which is that all the small characters have a unique voice. They all have a proper character to them. Like, I can talk to you about the innkeeper in Four Kings. I can talk to you about Master Gil from Camelin. I can talk to you about Elaine, the princess. All of those have really strong characters, and they all have a really unique voice, to the point where there are actually a few times in the book where Jordan will not tell you who's speaking, that he'll just like put some speech in there, and you always know who that is. You always know who's speaking, which is such a massive feat for yes, it's a very big book, but there are so many characters in this book, and apparently there's something like 2,000 named characters in the Wheel of Time, and like reading this, I was like, oh, absolutely, I know why there's 2,000 named characters, because you will meet a character like I think his name was Gob from Four Kings again. So like in the Four Kings sequence, you meet a dark friend called Gob, and like you know so much about that character. He's such a unique voice. He has a unique description, and like that character's in like one chapter, and like that's how you know that those thousands of characters aren't wasted. And I was absolutely in love with that aspect of the book. That was, I think, one of the main pros. And I will come back to this maybe when I talk about pros and cons. But one of the biggest things for me was that how real all of the characters felt and how consistent they seemed to be. I really also, when we're talking one last thing about the world, I thought that the descriptions of the towns was really good, and my favourite section was the Blight. So there's a section where you get to learn about the Blight, you get to learn what it's like there, and that was really, really well described. It was so vivid, and the Eye of the World itself as a place, again, incredibly vivid, incredibly interesting, and I felt like every scene that I was reading, I felt like I could imagine that scene extremely vividly. Let's move on though to characters next. So I think that I'm going to talk about these characters in kind of like order of my faves or like the most interesting. So I want to talk first about Rand. So the number one thing that I would talk to people about in this book, and I've mentioned it to a load of people, is how it's very funny that Rand is like super tall and super hot. It seems very like wish fulfillment for the author. He's super tall, he's super hot, he's different, you know. He's not like other boys, and every woman that he meets fancies him, which is very funny. Although I also like the ongoing joke that he's constantly saying like, "Oh, I wish I could talk to women like Perrin," and then in the Perrin chapters he's like, "Oh man, I'm so rubbish at talking to girls. I wish I could talk to girls like Rand," and like they're both just jealous of each other for the same thing, which is really funny. So Rand is an incredibly interesting character. He's probably one of the characters that you can kind of spoil, or you can talk about while spoiling. You can't talk about fully without spoiling the book, is the way I'm trying to say it. So I won't go too in depth with Rand, apart from to say that I really liked him as a protagonist. I can absolutely see why people say that Kaelin from The Bound and the Broken is very similar to Rand, because they both have that kind of reluctant hero trope, as it were. But I think the thing that separates the two is, I mean, there is ability in terms of like Rand kind of knows throughout the whole book that if he gets into a fight he'll probably lose. So that's quite interesting. Dry throat, that's what happens when you record two videos in a row. So yeah, Rand knows his limitations. I like a lot that Rand is very much like, oh God, I can't say anything right to Egwene. Because that's like, you know, they're like 19 or whatever. That makes complete sense. Like, when you're 19, or, you know, even as old as I am, there's very much like, oh, I have absolutely no idea what my partner is thinking some of the time. It's not very often nowadays, I have to admit, but yeah. I really also just liked the kind of the development of his character. I really enjoyed there are several times when he makes decisions against his best interests, and the explanation of that through the book I thought was really smart. Let's move on, because I can't just spend 10 minutes talking about Rand and then skip through all the other characters. So Moraine was probably my next most interesting character. Moraine is very interesting because, oh, actually, quickly back to Rand. Very one minor thing. Um, don't watch the show if you're going to read these books, because I watched season one of the show before I got super into reading, and so kind of assumed I would never read the books. And uh, basically, the pilot massively spoils the end of this book. Um, you get to learn. You're told, for example, in the pilot, what Moraine is looking for and what she thinks the Emmons Field trio or quad in the show, what she thinks the that is going to be the MacGuffin, as it were, and you almost don't even learn that at all in either world. It's kind of hinted at the very end. Anyway, Moraine is excellent. I love how she's this kind of like mysterious but also very feminine character. I think that the she's obviously kind of she's meant to be based on like Gandalf, but I like how many layers she has as a character. I like that she's kind of caring but also austere. I like that she is kind of outwardly like she's described as short multiple times, and I think that's quite funny to have this kind of like, 5 foot nothing diminutive woman who is incredibly powerful. I like that one of the magics that she uses, this is a very minor spoiler, but is to make herself appear to be like 100 feet tall. That's very funny to me. Her relationship with Lan is incredible. I love that they feel like two halves, if that makes sense. So like, she will like, he often finishes her sentences almost. Like she'll be like, "Oh, we can't do blah blah blah," and Lan will be like, "Because you'll all die." All that sort of stuff. Lan, I also loved. Lan is he's a very big presence in this book, but he's a very small part of this book because he has so few lines, and he has so little. He's very stoic, and so because he has no outward emotion, it's hard for you to become as emotionally attached to him. However, I did spend the entire book going, "Wow, this guy rules. He's incredibly cool," and I'm really looking forward to seeing how Rand, by spending more time with Lan, becomes a more skilled fighter, can make some more interesting combat and action scenes. Perrin, I really liked as well. I mean, spoilers, there's only one character in this book that I didn't love, and a lot of that was because I felt like his story through the book was the thing that took away his interesting characteristic. So we'll come to him at the end. So Perrin, I really liked. Perrin has a really interesting. He has kind of the same kind of conflict that all of the characters have, which is that they know they have to be doing this thing, going on the quest with Moraine, but they kind of don't want to. They want to live their village lives. Like he's an apprentice blacksmith. He's not. He's got a lot going on. He's got a life. He's got prospects. And then something is happening to Perrin throughout this book. Kind of starts happening around the middle of the book that he just does not want to happen. And I think that's really interesting because you often see the magical kind of MacGuffin, the thing that kicks off a character's journey and arc in books, and they're like, "Oh my god, I'm so excited! I have magic powers." But Perrin's like, "This sucks. I don't want magic powers. I just want to be a blacksmith." And I liked that conflict with him. And speaking of conflicts as well, we also have Nynaeve, who has this kind of. So she is the wisdom of their town, which is kind of like their faith healer, their like witch doctor style character. And she learns that she has the ability to access the same powers that Moraine has as an Aes Sedai. But as a wisdom, she hates Aes Sedai. So she has that dichotomy as well, where she has that part of her character that she grew up around hating, that is now a part of her, and also the relationship between Nynaeve and another character in the book was extremely well done. The subtle hints and references. There's a fantastic one in the White Cloak camp that I really, really liked. I don't know if I would have caught it if I hadn't watched the show, but I did catch it in the book and I really liked it. I was really happy with that. Let's talk a little bit about Egwene. Egwene feels like the odd one out in this book, and I can see why in the show they decided that she should be one of the Tavarin, of the fated people, because in the book it feels like she kind of just tags along, and then once she has tagged along, Moraine is like, well, actually, you should be here. You're part of this, but at the very beginning, it feels almost like happenstance that she comes along. I like that she's the only Emmons Fielder who's doesn't give a shit about Emmons Field. She likes her family and her friends, but she wants to explore. She wants to leave the town, but she'd never have been able to in her previous life, and so that's why she kind of runs away with the gang. And I think that was a really good character moment for her, but I feel like she then doesn't get very much again throughout the books. The book, not books. And I feel like her side story sort of thing with the Tinkers, the travelling people, is probably the least interesting aspect of the book for me so far. I liked the Tinkers conceptually, but I feel like we spent a lot of time with them. Next is Tom. So Tom Merrilin is a gleeman, which is like a bard / storyteller, and I thought he was excellent. I liked at the beginning. I was like, "Who's this dude? Why is he coming along?" And then, as the book goes on, I was like, "Oh, this character is becoming more and more and more interesting with every chapter," and I really liked when you finally get his backstory and why he's involving himself in this thing with the boys and the Aes Sedai. And I thought that was really interesting. And I am excited to see where his character goes. Finally, we have the character which I alluded to earlier, which is Matt. So, Matt is introduced to us as a prankster, a trickster, a funny guy, but he then spends the entire book not being funny or pulling pranks or doing anything like that. And I know that is because of the story element introduced quite early on in the book. But I have to say, I just wanted that. I wanted personality out of him, not like what we got. So, one of my friends who has read the whole series says that Matt is his favourite character. So I'm withholding judgment, but he was my least favourite character in the Eye of the World. Now, I've just realised how long this review is going on, so we'll go straight into story. So I'm going to give you a few short points on the story, but again, because we're going to do no spoiler here, if you want my full spoiler thoughts, come on to the spoiler discussion. Once we have filmed that, I'll make sure it's linked down below, but for the time being, it may just also be in my Wheel of Time playlist on the channel, so keep an eye. So the first thing I liked about the story was there's no bad POVs. So we only get a few POVs in this book, so it's kind of Rand, Nynaeve, and Perrin are really the only POVs you get. But I liked all of them. I think that one of the reasons that Matt doesn't come off that well is because he has no POV. So again, looking forward to seeing where that goes and what we get from that character. I never got to a chapter and was like, oh, I just want to read more about Rand. I would get to a chapter and be like, oh man, this is cool. I want to read more about this character. I really liked the dream sequences. They felt unreal and dreamlike in a way that not every writer can do well. And I really liked how the consequences that the dreams had in the real world as well. I thought that was a very cool idea for Jordan to put together. Um, I really liked that none of the stuff that they did felt like a side quest. So I talked in some books about how it felt like, this is a great example, right? So if you've watched Star Wars: The Last Jedi, the stuff that Finn and Rose are doing on Canto Blight, just feels like a side quest. It doesn't feel important, and in the end, it kind of isn't important, and that's a big problem for me. It feels like the director of that film wasted our time, whereas I don't feel like the diversions or the time that we spent on people or characters or places that were not immediately moving the plot forward were still moving the plot forward or building the world around that plot, but not in a way that made it feel like wasted time. Really, really happy with the balance of stuff we got in this book. I know that from talking to people who've read the whole series that does change, but for now, I really felt like all the side stuff. So like meeting Elias, meeting the Tinkers, the journey up the road from Camolin, all of that, Shalala Goth, for example, all of it felt necessary. They felt like it was moving the plot forward, even when it felt almost like it was simultaneously a sidestep and a step forward. So let's talk about, I had one more thing, but I'm going to save that for pros and cons. So let's talk about the pros, and do you know what? I'm going to give my score now. So I gave this a 4 stars out of 5. The same thing that I said about a lot of books, like for example Harbinger of Justice, was that it didn't give me that 5-star feeling. Multiple sections of the book I felt the 5-star feeling, but I didn't feel it enough throughout the book, so it ended up sitting at that, like, this is an extremely good book that I would recommend people to read, 4 stars. Now the pros for me are the world and the lore. The thing that I haven't really talked about so far, which is the writing style, which is that blend of modern and classic and very accessible, which is something that I personally think is incredibly important. So I don't want to... It's not that I don't want to read a book with very flowery purple prose, but I'm way less interested in that than a book that can tell me its story in an accessible way. I want to be able to recommend this book to everyone. I want to be able to recommend books to people who don't like reading. And I think that you could do that with The Wheel of Time. My final pro is the soft magic system. So Brandon Sanderson says this is a hard magic system. I currently don't believe him, and I don't think Robert Jordan thought it was. But I really liked how malleable the magic system was, how many things that Moraine could do with it, and all that sort of jazz. And I really liked the 2 halves and the opposing genders of the magic system. I'll be interested to see how the books kind of talk about the gender divide as the books go on, because it does feel very much like... It almost feels like this is the beginning of like men rising up again in a matriarchal society, which I'm not massively interested in reading about, but I'm interested to read more, definitely, to see whether that's where it's going. My first con is also the soft magic system, because I would like to understand it a little bit more. So, like I said, the variety of things that Moraine could do with the magic are really interesting. But I would love to know whether there are limits, especially the stuff that happens in the final battle sequence. I felt was not particularly clear. I didn't really understand how... I didn't understand how the magic was being used to do the things, and I would like to know a little bit more. I do like soft magic systems, and in many ways I prefer them to hard magic systems, but I do just want to have that little bit more explanation and knowledge, which I assume we'll get down the road. If Sanderson says it's a hard magic system, he probably knows what's going on. Also, talking about the ending was not super clear. Like I just said about the magic and how it was used in the ending, it felt like there's kind of like a big battle, and that very much felt like what I have heard about the book, which is that Jordan basically wrote the whole plot for all of the series and then was like, oh, I do need to have a satisfying ending for book one in case I don't get any more books. And it was satisfying, but I wish that there was more of a payoff. I wish that we had more overall to give us on that book, you know? I would like to have had a little bit more closure on some of the side stuff. But, you know, we have like 15 books to read, so I guess now I know that eventually those things will have some payoff. But for the time being, it would have been nice to have had a couple of more sub-stories closed off, if that makes sense. Because basically, at the end of the book, everything is left hanging, and it would have been nice to have gotten a bit of closure. I would like more history and lore about the Dark One, about the villain. I assume that's coming, so less of a complaint knowing that there are 15 books, but if I was reading this book by itself, I think maybe that would have been a complaint. Also, I feel like we don't learn anything about the Forsaken, and then they just kind of turn up. And I definitely need to know more about them, what's going on with them, what are their abilities, what are their powers. I'd love to learn more. I really like the description of the two Forsaken that you meet, though. The way they look and the way they act and the way they talk. Fantastic. One negative that is not the book's fault at all is that because I had because I watched the TV show, I knew loads of the main plot points. So that mildly spoiled my experience and is possibly responsible for it not being a 5-star book, because there were no surprises or revelations during the book. Everything big that is in the book is also in the show. So I was never as surprised. I was like, well, this is probably the moment when X is going to do Y, you know? And that's it. So I know I had a lot of cons, but the pros, smaller in number, outweigh those cons massively. Like I said, this is a 4-star reading experience for me, possibly ruined by the TV show. I saw on the Tutor Ramble video that they said that the next book is 3 times better. So I guess we're going to be giving that one 12 stars. I'm very excited to read the next book in the series. And I have to admit, I almost was like, maybe I should binge this series. But I'm going to do one a month. We're sticking to it. Maybe we'll speed up later in the year, or maybe we'll continue at the same pace. But I'm definitely going to commit to reading one a month until I say otherwise. So, if you would like to see more Wheel of Time content, there is going to be on the channel a short reviewing this special edition of Either World that I got for Christmas. There is going to be a full spoiler discussion with me and Matt from Bask in the Story. And finally, there's going to be more non-spoiler reviews coming every single month. So, thanks so much for watching. Please make sure that you subscribe to see more Wheel of Time content. There's also way more fantasy and science fiction book stuff on the channel. I put up videos every Monday through Friday, so please do give it a watch. And finally, I'd love if you like this video too. Thanks so much for sticking with me throughout this whole very long 30+ minute review, which was not my intention. Maybe I need to slim down my my notes on the book here for the next few books. Let me know whether you think that this video could be shorter. I don't know. Anyway, have a great time. Hope you enjoyed this video. And drop like a wheel emoji or something. If there's a wheel emoji, drop a wheel emoji so I know you've watched the whole video. And thank you very much for watching. Goodbye. See you tomorrow.